Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an analysis from a source that takes a really critical look at the No Kings 3.0 protest. Their argument? It wasn't the powerful movement organizers claimed it would be. We're going to walk through exactly how they built that case. Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The source we're looking at really frames its entire argument around this one single idea, that the protest wasn't a show of political strength at all, but was actually, a sign of some kind of internal collapse. So to see how the source gets to that conclusion, we're going to break down their case into 5 parts. We'll look at their whole meltdown theory, what they say happened on the ground, a logical flaw they claim to have found, their psychological take on the protesters, and finally, what they saw in the crowd's demographics.
All right, first up, let's unpack that core claim. This is really the foundation for everything else the source is going to argue.
So the main idea here is that the event just completely failed to live up to the hype. Instead of some huge mobilization, the source claims it devolved into what it calls a spectacular, chaotic, self-defeating disaster. Strong words for sure. Next, the analysis moves to what it claims was actually happening on the streets, putting the big promises side by side with what they say was the reality. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the contrast the source draws here. On one side, you have the promise of millions of people, a tectonic shift. But the reality they report? Small crowds, a very specific demographic, and events that they say were marked more by vandalism than anything else. And to back up that meltdown claim, the analysis points to specific things they say happened. These alleged incidents are presented as their evidence that this wasn't some disciplined political movement, but something much, much messier. Okay, so moving on from the street-level reports, the source makes a really fascinating philosophical point. It argues there's a huge logical flaw baked into the very idea of the protest. Now, to get what they're saying, we first have to understand this key concept, a performative contradiction. It's basically when your actions completely cancel out your words. Like, writing down, "I can't write a single word." And here's how the source applies that idea. The argument is that the protesters' very ability to get together and protest freely across the entire country directly undermines their claim that they're living under some kind of oppressive dictator. This quote they use, from a commentator, really just sums up their whole point. It's basically challenging the protest's foundation by pointing out the exact freedoms the participants were using at that very moment. So then the analysis takes a big turn. It shifts from logic to psychology, to try and figure out what was really driving the people who showed up. This line comes from a New York psychotherapist cited in the source. And wow, what a way to reframe things. It suggests the whole act of protesting wasn't political, it was therapeutic. So, according to this theory, the protest is really just a psychological coping mechanism. It's argued that it gives people this temporary emotional boost, a dopamine hit of feeling like they're part of something instead of being an actual, effective tool for political change. And from there, the source zooms out. It takes that psychological diagnosis of the individual protester and turns it into this bigger theory about how politics works in our society today. The source lays out this 4-step logic. The idea goes something like this. As traditional religion fades away, politics rushes in to fill that void. Government becomes the highest authority, the new church, basically. And if that's the case, then your political opponents aren't just people you disagree with. They're demons that need to be cast out. All right, and for the final piece of this analysis, the source zooms right in on the crowd itself. Who was there, who wasn't, and what they claim all of that says about the bigger political landscape. The source paints a very, very specific picture of the crowd's makeup, describing it as a pretty narrow slice of the American population. But what's maybe even more telling from this source's perspective is who wasn't there. The analysis presents the absence of Gen Z and Latino voters as a huge warning sign, arguing these are the exact groups the Democratic Party needs for its future. The source even comes up with a name for this kind of activity, symbolic management. It's defined as a kind of low-risk performance, basically a way for people who are already comfortable to feel like they're resisting without actually risking anything important. And here's where it all comes together. The source uses all those on-the-ground observations to draw this massive conclusion. It contrasts what it calls the performative left with a flourishing right, essentially saying this one protest is a perfect snapshot of 2 movements heading in totally opposite directions. And this brings us to the source's final bottom-line take. It ties together all the threads, the chaos, the contradiction, the psychology, the demographics, to label the whole thing as performative theater.
and then adds the very specific claims that it was expensive and Soros-funded.
And that really leaves us with a big question to chew on. Based on this analysis, which draws such a sharp line between performance and real power, what actually makes a political movement authentic? Where is that line between just theater and the real deal?